So here we are back with another lecture, and in today's lecture we will talk about the specialized cells that we have in the plants. Now, what our idea of the specialized cells is that the specialized cells, they would have a different structure and it would allow them to perform a different or a particular function. Now, before we proceed with it, you must know that what specialized cells we people have to see in case of the plants. So you name them as a Palisade mesophyll cells. Then we have these root hair cells, and then there would come the third thing that we have to talk in today's class. And these are the vessels, and the vessels they are entitled as the xylem vessels. Now we see that plant overall is a complex organism and it has got multiple organs in it. The leaves is an organ, the stem of the plant is an organ, and the root that we have got is an organ. And we must never confuse these root with the root hair cell. And we will see in a while that the root hair cell is a specialized cell that we have got within the organ of the plant, and that organ of the plant is the root. Now, before we proceed with the further details, I would like you to be looking on toward the leaf structure because from the leaf structure we have to discuss some specialized cells. So your idea of the leaf structure should be valid. So when we say about the leaf, so the thing is that this is an organ. Why this is an organ? It has got multiple tissues, and all of the tissues they are performing one special role. So when those multiple tissues they would combine, so we would have this specialized organ with us, and this organ would be the leaf. Now, just know the multiple layers that we have in the leaf. At the top, we will have the cuticle, and immediately below the cuticle, there would be coming up of the cells, and these cells are the epidermal cells. And these epidermal cells, in the case of leaf, they lie in the upper epidermis, and they also are present within the lower epidermis. Then we will have the photosynthesizing cells that would photosynthesize and would make their own food. Among that, we have these palisade mesophyll cells, and we have got these spongy mesophyll cells. And we can never forget to mention these other cells that we have in the leaf. So they are the guard cells, and in between the guard cells, there would be the opening, and those openings they are the stomatal pores. The student they confuse the guard cells with the stomatal pores, but guard cell is a structure, and the space in between the structure that guard cell is, so those spaces they are the stomatal pores. Now here again we have got this handmade diagram. I've got it for you people. So at the top you see that this is a transparent layer, and this transparent layer is cuticle. Immediately below this transparent layer, if you were to see here, so we have got a layer of the cells, and each of the cell that we have here, so it would be an epidermal cell. And since this is lying toward the top of the leaf, so we call this as upper epidermis. The upper epidermis cells they are not photosynthesizing because they would lack the chloroplast in them. If I were to come below the upper epidermis, so here we have these palisade mesophyll cells. And from the appearance, you may see that they are long and cylindrical, they are closely packed, and they are lying near to the top of the plant. And they would have multiple abundant chloroplasts in them, and that is why these palisade mesophyll cells, among all the cells that we have in the leaf, which is an organ, so it would be performing maximum photosynthesis. If I go below the palisade mesophyll cells, so here you see I have made many of rough round kind of the shape cells with me. So these are spongy mesophyll cells. Now why we call them as spongy? The reason is simple, because we see a lot of air spaces in between these cells. So due to the presence of the spaces, so this becomes spongy mesophyll cells layer. And again, like the palisade mesophyll cells, these spongy mesophyll cells, they are also photosynthesizing. But since their content of the chloroplast comparative to the palisade mesophyll cells is less, so the rate at which they photosynthesize can never be equal to the what the palisade mesophyll cells are performing. Now here you have to see another thing, that within the spongy mesophyll cells, the examiner would show in the exam some big boxes. And these big boxes that I am highlighting at the moment, so they are the xylem vessels. And then the small boxes that you see at these points, so these are the phloem, and collectively the xylem and the phloem, they make the vascular bundles. The vascular bundles we will see in a separate chapter, but for the moment you need to remember is that the xylem and the phloem vessels, they are the conducting vessels. By the conducting, we mean that they would be transporting the water and ions. That is done by the xylem vessels. And as far this phloem is concerned, so this phloem will be transporting the sucrose and the amino acid up and down the plant. But the xylem vessels would only be conducting the water and the ions from the roots to the stem and ultimately to the leaves of the plant. If I were to go below the spongy mesophyll cells, so here, if I show you, so this is the lower epidermis, and in the lower epidermis, each individual cell that I have made here, so this is the lower epidermal cell, and overall, all these lower epidermal cells, they would be making the lower epidermis of the leaf. And here you have to be vigilant that we have got these bean-shaped looking cells, and these bean-shaped looking cells that we have here, so they are the guard cells, and in between the guard cells we have got these openings, and these openings, they are the stomatal pores, and these stomatal pores, they have an advantage in terms of doing the exchange of the gases between the air spaces that we have here and in the external environment. So you see that we have got multiple tissues. Like these epidermal cells that we have at the top, they would make epidermal tissue. Here we would have palisade cells combined together to make the palisade tissues. Here we have the spongy mesophyll cells. And these spongy mesophyll cells collectively, they would make the spongy mesophyll tissues. Here we have the lower epidermal cells making epidermal tissue, lower epidermal tissue, and then we have these guard cells. So overall, this leaf becomes an organ having multiple tissues in it. From the paper point of view, we have to relate the function of the palisade mesophyll cells to their maximum photosynthesis. Then we have to see that how come these xylem vessels that we have got in the spongy mesophyll layer, how they are adapted to be conducting the water and the ions. And the last specialized cell we have need to have a look on, so they are the root hair cells. Now, let me take you quickly toward understanding that how the structure of the palisade mesophyll cell is and how come this is adapted to be doing maximum photosynthesis. So, as we have seen that these palisade mesophyll cells, they are lying in between the upper epidermis and in between the spongy mesophyll cells. And overall, if we say about the structure, that how their structure looks like, so this is long and they are cylindrical in shape, like they are long, they are cylindrical, and they are closely packed. And here comes a diagram of this palisade mesophyll cell, as is the case with all of the plant cells. So on the outside here we have the cell wall in them, and when I would go below the cell wall, so here we have the cell membrane, and then at the center of these we have got this large vacuole, and the large vacuole, you know from the previous classes that this has a solution filled in it, which is the cell sap, and the membrane that we have got for the large vacuole of this palisade mesophyll cell, so we would give it a different name, and the name is entitled as a tonoplast. Now this is the same as a cell membrane we have got below the cell wall, but the situation is that since we have to be clear that to what membrane we are referring to, and if I am referring to the membrane of the large vacuole, so the word becomes tonoplast. And it's the case that this is a eukaryotic cell, so we would have the nucleus and palisade mesophyll cells as well. And now since the large vacuole is coming on towards the center, so this is pushing the nucleus to one side of the cell. Now the idea is that how come these palisade mesophyll cells, they are adapted for maximum photosynthesis. You must know that these palisade mesophyll cells, they are lying close to, or they are located close to the upper epidermis. So they would receive maximum of the sunlight, and there would be no barrier of the sunlight falling on them because the cuticle is transparent, and the upper epidermis cells, they don't have any chloroplasts, so light would directly hit these palisade mesophyll cells. The other situation is that these palisade mesophyll cells, they have these abundant chloroplasts in them. So when they have abundant chloroplasts in them, that means that they would be in the position to be absorbing maximum of the sunlight, and by that they would be making maximum of the glucose. So here I have written it down as well, that for the adaptations of the palisade mesophyll cells, the scenario is that they lie or they are positioned toward or close to the upper epidermis, and in that way they are receiving maximum of the sunlight. Other than that, they have got abundant chloroplasts in them, so that would allow them to be absorbing the maximum sunlight. The third feature is that these chloroplasts, they are aligned in a very appropriate or uniform manner, so that would again enable them to be absorbing a lot of sunlight, and the sunlight absorption we know would be helpful with an intention to be absorbing to be doing more of the photosynthesis. Now let us come on toward the other specialized cell that we have to look on, and these are the root hair cells. Earlier, I have said that the plants they have got multiple of the organs in them, and among the leaf organs, we have said that there is gonna be this leaves, the stem, and the root. So the root is organ, and the root hair cells would be the extensions of the root. So you just look here. So here we have got the diagram of the root. Now, as far as the situation with the root is there, so you must keep it in your mind as that these roots they have this outer epidermis layer. Okay, epidermis would also be there in our human skin, but we will see it later. So we have this epidermis immediately below the epidermis. So here we have got the cortex, and in the cortex we have the cortical cells. When I'm gonna come on toward the center of the root, so at this point we have the xylem, and then it would be surrounded by this, and here we have the phloem vessels, and these phloem they would be translocating the amino acids and the sucrose. Now you must focus that in the root, I have got this cell, and this is the epidermal cell. Now, when this epidermal cell is gonna get outward, and this would elongate, and this would specialize, so we would make this specialized cell, and this is the root hair cell, and this extends outward from the epidermis of the root. Now, before I proceed with making you understand that how the function of the root hair is adapted to be performing the function, now there are two of the terms you need to have an idea of. One is osmosis and the other one is active transport. For osmosis, the word that should click in your mind is that it would be involving the movement of the water. When I am using the word active transport, so that this word active transport means that we would be intended to be moving the ions and by using the energy as well. So you see it for yourself that in the osmosis, the area A has got less number of the water molecule, the area B has got more number of the water molecules. So a place where the water molecules are more, so it would be regarded as an area of higher water potential. And that place where the number of the water molecules is less, so this would be the area of the lower water potential. So whenever the water molecules they move from an area of higher water potential to an area of lower water potential, so this is osmosis, right? And if I were to tell about the active transport, so you see that at this point I have got less number of charged particles. Here I have got more number of the charged particles. So where we have less number of the particles, so this is an area of lower concentration. Where we have more number of the charged particles, so this would be area of higher concentration. And if I have to move the ions from an area of lower concentration to an area of higher concentration, and that too against a concentration gradient by utilizing the energy, so this is active transport. Now, why these two terms are important? Because the root hair cells, as I have said earlier, that they have to absorb the water and they have to absorb the ions like the sodium, magnesium, chloride, and the nitrate ions. So these two phenomena, osmosis and active transport, should be in our mind. Now, let us first see that what we have in the structure of the root hair cell. So, as is the case, they would have cell wall, the cell membrane, then there would be some transport proteins, and the transport proteins should always be related to the cell membranes of the root hair cell. Again, we're gonna have these large vacuoles, and another thing is that these root hair cells they don't have any chloroplasts, but they have the abundant mitochondria. Now here comes the diagram of the root hair cell. If you look for yourself, so here you see that I have got on the outside is the cell wall of the root hair cell, and if I were to highlight it with the laser pointer, so this is the cell wall we have in this root hair cell, and immediately below the cell wall the bluish marking that you see here, so this would be the cell membrane of the root hair cell. And in the cell membrane, we see the presence of the specialized proteins, and these proteins they are the transport proteins. And then toward the center, we have got this large vacuole, and this large vacuole already has got abundant amount of or greater amount of the ions in it. And there are the mitochondria present as well in the structure of the root hair cell, because we need to be releasing the energy out of the root hair cells if I were to absorb the ions from the soil into the large vacuole, and that is by the active transport. Now, the scenario is that how come these root hair cells they are adapted to be absorbing the ions and the water, so you see they are long and they are narrow. Why they have to be long and narrow? So they can penetrate deeper into the soil, or they should be growing to the greater length so that they can come in more contact with the soil particles, and in between the soil particles, the water would be available and they would be absorbing it. Now, the other thing is that if I have this area A and if I have this area B, and in between area A and area B, if I have got the thickness as this much, like one layer thick kind of a situation, so it would be easier for us to move the particles. But if I keep on increasing the distance between the area A and the area B, then ultimately the movement of the substances, it would not be that much efficient. So for the root hair cell, they are thin. Okay, when they are thin, so their surface area to the volume ratio would be increased and they would absorb more of the water and ions. And the other situation is that when they are thin, so as a consequence of that, the distance between the two areas is reduced, and when the distance area is reduced, then ultimately the movement of the particles by diffusion or by other mechanisms, so this would be enhanced. And as I have said, that these root hair cells, they have got abundant mitochondria and the transport proteins in them. By the abundant mitochondria, they would release a lot of energy, and that would allow them to be absorbing the ions from a place where they are present in less number to a place where they are present in more number. And for that purpose, we require the active transport. And for this absorption of the ions by the active transport, these mitochondria not only and these root hair cells, not only they have got the mitochondria, but they also have got the transport proteins, because the ions, they can't simply cross the cell membranes directly, but rather than they require these transport proteins. So again, this is the feature of the root hair cell, to be absorbing the ions from an area of lower concentration to an area of higher concentration against the concentration gradient, and for that they have got these mitochondria that would be releasing the energy for that. Now, once we have accumulated a lot of ions within the large vacuole of the root hair cell, so this would lower the water potential. And on the outside in the soil, the water potential would be increased. So water would move now with the help of osmosis from the higher water potential that we have in the soil to the low water potential that we have got within the large vacuole of these root hair cells. So that is why I clear it for you that why come the active transport and osmosis have to be clear, because without that you can't simply see that how the root hair cells are adapted for the function. Now here we have got some other structures within the leaf, within the stem and within the roots, and they are the vascular bundles. Whenever the word vascular bundles come in biology, so two words should click in your mind. One are the xylem vessels and then the other one are the phloem vessels. As far as the role of the xylem vessel is concerned, so they would be absorbing the water and the ions. And as far as the phloem vessels are to be bothered about, so they would be moving the sugars, that would be sucrose, and they would move the amino acid around the plant. For this particular chapter, we must know that how come the xylem vessel is adapted for the movement of the water and the ions. Now you see that I have this xylem vessel made right in front of you. So the inside of the xylem vessels that we have got over here, so you need to remember its name, and the name would be the lumen. The lumen of the xylem vessel is wider and there is no presence of the cells here. Like if I were to arrange a lot of the plant cells within the xylem vessel, so there would be a lot of organelles in them and it would hinder the movement of the water. So we say that the xylem vessels, they are dead, and when they are dead, so their lumen, it becomes empty, and when this becomes empty, so the water can move uninterrupted and without any kind of the hindrance from the stem upward to the leaves. Now, since these xylem vessels, they have to carry the water under high pressure. So you see that they have got only the side walls, like we will have no cross walls in them, only the side walls in them. And these side walls, they are made up of two things. One that make them up is the cellulose, the other thing that makes the surrounding cell wall of the xylem vessel, this is the lignin. And the lignin is a waterproof layer. That means that the water cannot evaporate out of the xylem vessels. And they add to the strength of the cellulose surrounding walls. So that means that when the water would be conducted in the xylem vessels under high pressure, so they don't burst. So if I were to simply summarize it, the xylem vessels, they are long and they are continuous so that they can move the water over long distances. They have got a wider lumen, and that wider lumen would allow more volume of the water to be carried upward. They don't have any side walls, but only the side walls. And they don't have any cross walls, but only the side walls they have. So this means that the water can be carried upward in an uninterrupted way. and we don't have got any of the living cells in the lumen of the xylem. So again, the water can be moved uniformly upward. For the flowing vessels, you just know at the moment ends that they would be translocating the sucrose and the amino acid around the plant. So these were the specialized cell structures that we have in the plant. So see you people in the next class.